A few days ago, Universal Pictures put out the announcement for Christopher Nolan's highly anticipated next feature. Hot on the heels of his Oppenheimer Oscar wins for Best Picture, Director, Lead and Supporting Actors, the speculation about Nolan's next movie was fever pitch over the last few weeks. Hollywood scoopers put out all sorts of rumors about potential projects, ranging from a period vampire thriller to a 1980s Blue Thunder reboot, to the obligatory James Bond project rumors. Nolan surprised everyone, however, with confirming a project that wasn't on anyone's radar. An adaptation of one of the world's original adventure stories, the Greek epic poem The Odyssey by Homer. While it's quite a ballsy move to go from such heavy subject matter as the invention of nuclear weapons to taking on probably one of the most celebrated adventure stories in human history, it is not that unusual for Nolan. As the cinematic auteur of our time, Nolan has proven time and again that he's capable of tackling many different genres, has a love for epic, bombastic action, and is not afraid to take on consequential topics like the nature of time, dreams, space travel, heroism, and significant historical events like the Allied evacuation of Dunkirk or the Manhattan Project. So all things considered, Nolan taking on The Odyssey seems not so surprising after all. So what can we expect from Nolan's interpretation of this classic story from Greek mythology? Will it be a sword and sandals adventure akin to Gladiator, taking on themes of heroism and vengeance? Will it be grounded in reality like Nolan's Batman trilogy, or embrace the fantastical and mythological elements of the original tale? Will Tom Holland play Odysseus' son, Telemachus, or Hermes the messenger god, or perhaps a spider-like demon from the underworld? We'll take on all these and other questions in due course, but let's start by recapping the core plot of The Odyssey, especially for the benefit of listeners who are less familiar with the story. Before I begin summarizing the plot of The Odyssey, I'd like to extend an apology for my pronunciation of characters and locations in Greek mythology, which will undoubtedly be painful to hear to native speakers. I hope my love for the story will compensate to some extent. The Odyssey is the story of the Greek hero Odysseus, the king of the island nation of Ithaca, husband to his dear wife Penelope, and father to his toddler son Telemachus. Odysseus is renowned throughout Greece for being one of the most wily and cunning men of his age. Indeed, he is revered by some of the Greek gods for this very trait, and one in particular, Athena, goddess of wisdom and war and the daughter of Zeus, appoints herself as his protectress and patron. The plot is set in motion when Paris, the prince of Troy, abducts Helen, the young queen of the Greek nation of Sparta, inciting the Greeks to launch a 1,000-ship armada to recover her. This results in the 10-year-long famed Trojan War, dramatized to great effect in the 2004 film Troy, starring Brad Pitt as Achilles and Sean Bean as Odysseus. While the war is replete with incredible battles, twists and turns, and displays of heroism, the decisive blow is struck by Odysseus, who hatches the scheme of the Trojan horse, providing a surreptitious entry for the Greek heroes into the city, and ultimately, victory for the Greeks. Following the fall of Troy, Odysseus attempts to make his way home to his beloved Ithaca, only to encounter various hurdles in his path, some wrought upon him by the intervention of the gods of Olympus. On his many misadventures, he encounters fantastical beasts and monsters, like the Cyclops Polyphemus and the six-headed monster Scylla, cannibalistic giants on the island of Laestrygonies, a witch goddess named Circe who drugs his men and turns them into animals, and the beautiful nymph Calypso who falls in love with Odysseus and imprisons him on her island. At one point, Odysseus even journeys to the dreaded land of Hades, the Greek underworld, to gain information vital to bring him home. Throughout these tribulations, Odysseus escapes with his life through the use of his cunning, his stubborn will to live, and his ability to weave stories often on the spot, making him a fascinating underdog protagonist that you can't help but root for. While Odysseus has been suffering these slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, meanwhile his house on Ithaca has been overrun by lords of neighboring houses, all vying for the hand of Odysseus's wife, Penelope, believing Odysseus to be long dead. They plunder his food and drink and basically make merry at Odysseus's expense in his own house from dawn till dusk and await Penelope to choose one of them as her husband. Penelope's suitors also plot to kill Telemachus, her and Odysseus' son, who is now reaching manhood. I won't give away too much of the third act of the story, which is a fantastic set piece, full of action, intrigue, and plenty of emotion, but suffice it to say that Odysseus does eventually return home and exact his vengeance upon the parasites abusing his home and his family. The third act of the story has recently also been dramatized in the Umberto Pasolini movie The Return, starring Ralph Fiennes as Odysseus and Juliette Binoche as Penelope, a movie I can't wait to watch. Now on to some questions that I, and undoubtedly some of my viewers, will have about Nolan's adaptation of this epic tale. I suppose the most pressing and arguably consequential point to reflect on is if Nolan will make a faithful adaptation of the story, with all the mythological bells and whistles like gods and monsters, divine interventions and prophecies. Or will it be a more grounded take on the myth, treating the characters as real-world figures and the events as quasi-historical? If Nolan's track record is anything to go by, he does tend to favor realistic takes on stories, the perfect example of which is his treatment of the Batman mythos in the Dark Knight trilogy. All fantastical elements have been eschewed in favor of real-world, plausible interpretations of famous plotlines, origins, and power sets of the main characters. Nolan comments on the reason for this as well in interviews. He clearly believes that in order to immerse oneself in a story, one must be able to recognize the reality and relate to it. This is a point which really resonates with me personally, and why I've always struggled with hardcore fantasy fiction. I like some element of tethering to our reality, for example a real-world point-of-view character, in order to enjoy it. So it seems unlikely that Nolan will deviate from his established modus and give us a truly fantastical telling of the tale. The aforementioned Ralph Fiennes feature, The Return, also appears to take the realistic route. But does deliberately neglecting so many core parts of the original tale not worry Nolan, who likely is a big fan of the source material? My money, then, is him taking a similar route to Wolfgang Petersen's Troy, a more cheeky method in which mythological elements are acknowledged and even winked at, but not outrightly admitted to. A good example is Brad Pitt's Achilles, indeed taking a decisive arrow to the heel, but ultimately dying from more projectiles to the rest of his body. The viewer can then interpret the significance and vulnerability of the heel as they choose, whilst the main reality of the world the characters inhabit is still a grounded one. The next question to ask ourselves is if Nolan will tell a part of the story or all of it. I think the existence of the movie The Return tells us something. It is unlikely Nolan would follow a similar route and focus on the third act alone. However, knowing Nolan's love for playing with aspects of time in his features, it is possible that the return to Ithaca is used as a framing device, whilst the previous events are told in flashback, interwoven through the story, somewhat akin to The Prestige or even Batman Begins. I think an extensive retelling of the Trojan War is unlikely, except perhaps the dramatization of the Trojan horse stratagem, which tells us so much about Odysseus as a character. While a lot of screen time will also be spent on the middle part, his adventures as he journeys home. I think this bit is potentially the most challenging and would probably appeal to Nolan as a challenge, i.e. how to rein in the fantastical elements and make them feel grounded and relatable. The third act carries most of the payoffs and the emotional weight of the story, so will no doubt be a core feature. We all know how much Nolan loves a good climax. Wait, sorry, that sounded really weird, but you know what I mean. I have no doubt Nolan will make good use of the crescendo of the story, with satisfying comeuppance against the villains and emotional reunions between the heroes. The most important aspect to my mind is making sure that the movie is character-focused. The plot of the Odyssey is so rich in content, so original in its creativity, that I can understand the impulse to showcase the set pieces more than the character. Now, knowing Nolan, I seriously doubt we are in danger of that, but having seen the very plot-forward Tenet, it is a minor but present worry nonetheless. Odysseus is one of the most compelling protagonists a storyteller can hope to work with. He is the original man with a plan. A warrior who refuses to accept defeat and can always devise a way out. In this way, he's not unlike Batman, especially how Batman is depicted in the comics. Coupled with his personal drama, being separated from his family, his skill as a fighter, and his heroism, Nolan has the opportunity to give us a truly memorable hero who quite literally travels to hell and back to ultimately prevail on his enemies. Most of all, I hope Nolan focuses on Odysseus' intelligence as his defining trait, and have the character be 10 steps ahead of the audience, as exemplified in the very best Conan Doyle stories about Sherlock Holmes. Finally, based on the impressive cast list which has come out so far, let's spend some time on matching actors to characters. Online forums like Reddit already have some great speculation, which I'm more than happy to steal from. I think the first two are relatively easy. I'm pretty sure we'll be seeing Matt Damon suit up in a loincloth and robes as Odysseus, while Tom Holland will be playing his son Telemachus. Now, if I had a blank slate, would I choose Damon for the lead role? Probably not. I think Ralph Fiennes is fantastic casting, and could similarly imagine Michael Fassbender or Viggo Mortensen in the role. Matt Damon has, for want of better phrasing, a bit of a boxy look, and I imagine a leaner, taller man with aquiline features as Odysseus. But this is silly talk and definitely nitpicking. Matt Damon is always awesome, from Good Will Hunting to Bourne to Invictus. I have no doubt that he will turn in a stellar performance, especially with Nolan behind the camera. For the excellent female actors in the cast, I've read some great suggestions. Anne Hathaway as the faithful Penelope, Lupita Nyong'o as the beautiful nymph Calypso, Charlize Theron as the evil Circe, and Zendaya as the goddess Athena, or more likely, a more realistic interpretation of the same. The current Batman, Robert Pattinson, is speculated to be playing Antinous, the head of the army of Penelope's suitors and the main antagonist of the story. I can't fault any of these picks. Indeed, I think you could switch around especially the female actors for the roles and it would still work. For example, Lupita could just as easily play Circe, Charlize would make a great Penelope, and Anne Hathaway as Athena also works. The caliber of the actors poses minimal issues with such swaps. There are many more roles still to be filled, for example, Odysseus' dutiful herdsman, Eumaeus, his beloved housekeeper, Euryclea, his father, Laertes, King Menelaus of Sparta, and not to mention the plethora of fantastical beasts and gods, should Nolan decide to make use of them. All this is to say, if I was an actor in Hollywood, I would be hounding my agent right now to make sure Nolan's casting team knew my name. There are many other questions still to ponder. For example, will the movie carry an R rating or the more accessible PG-13, which Nolan generally tends to favor? Is it possible the setting of the movie is not in ancient Greece, but a contemporary retelling? Or even set in the far future, a la the excellent 80s cartoon Ulysses 31? Can we expect Nolan to make any major changes to the story in order to keep it fresh and surprising for all audiences? These and many other questions will no doubt be the subject of much debate in the months to come. For now, I can only express my genuine excitement at one of the most accomplished and innovative filmmakers of our time taking on one of my favorite stories. July 2026 truly cannot come soon enough. Now please sound off in the comments about your thoughts on Nolan's next project, and specifically what scenes you'd like to see move from page to screen. Until next time, my friends.